Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to the channel. This is Casey Snyder, and today we're doing a little bit different video, still related to doing tree work. These are all logs that I've collected over the dormant season, and what I'm going to do with them is inoculate them with mushroom spawn so that in a year or so I can have delicious oyster and shiitake mushrooms. I want to do a video about showing you my process and how I do this so that if you're interested to try it out, you can. So I have two piles of logs. This one is going to be used for doing
oyster
mushrooms. I have kind of a mixture of wood species. I have hackberry, I have some linden or basswood. I also have mulberry. Typically I'd be using cottonwood, but I did not have a chance to collect cottonwood or aspen this season. Over here is a little bit harder wood species, so I have a mixture of pin oak and white oak. The white oak bigger logs I'm actually going to use to try doing chicken of the woods this year. It'll be the first time I'm trying that, but otherwise these are going to be all used for doing shiitake mushrooms. I got interested in working with mushrooms and wood species about 8 years ago. I created a senior project when I was in college about how to use wood that's typical in South Dakota or rural shelter belts, taking that wood and using that to grow food with. It was kind of like a local food / resource management type of project. That's what I had in mind. And so I got all these woods collected with some friends and had a bunch of people show up and help me out with inoculating these mushrooms, and we had a really fun time. A few years later after that, I was moved up in the Twin Cities and I did another good round of inoculating and had a bunch of success with growing mostly oyster mushrooms. I didn't get much for the shiitakes. Early on in college, I had learned about a company called Field and Forest Products. They're based in Wisconsin, and they sold all these different supplies for inoculating mushrooms and all the different mushroom strains. And I actually met and worked with a mushroom farmer that used the process of taking logs he collected and growing mostly shiitake, but also a few other varieties as well. And I spent a day with him just kind of helping out, picking mushrooms. I got paid in mushrooms, and that kind of really kicked it off as well. And so now I'm continuing on with that, where I work for a city and I'm collecting these logs that are just otherwise going to be thrown into a chip pile or basically used as mulch, which is still a decent recycling of that product. However, I think it'd be fun to try to grow food with these, and this is just a good recycled medium to grow those mushrooms in. In short, mushrooms are super cool, but let's talk about the process for those who are interested in doing it themselves. Basically, step number one, collect some logs. Do it when the plant is dormant. You have a lot of nutrients still in that plant, and it's not spending a lot of the energy on growing leaf material. It's basically just dormant, locked in place. And so there's a lot of good carbohydrates stored in dormant logs. So that's what the mushrooms are going to feed on. And you are the person putting that mushroom into the log so that it can feed, and then, of course, make the mushroom. So I really should be saying fungus. We're putting fungus into logs so that hopefully later on we get mushrooms. So as you can see here, I have kind of an assembly line set up down the way. This is kind of my drilling station where I'm gonna drill holes in the logs. Then I take that drilled log and I'm gonna put it onto this table and I'm gonna fill it with the mushroom spawn. Now there's different types of spawn. This is the one that I choose to use. It's a sawdust spawn. Basically all this is a bunch of sawdust that has been processed really finely, and that's just basically kind of, if you want to imagine the mycelium or the roots of the mushrooms growing inside that sawdust. So we're taking this sawdust product and we're going to put it in the holes that we drill into the logs. There are other forms of inoculating, whether you use wood dowels or there's also little plugs that you can do. Those are almost easier, but this is just the way that I've learned it and like to do it. The essential way that we inject this into the tree is actually using this kind of syringe with a plunger on top. There's different tools for this, really advanced. This is kind of one of the more basic ones, but essentially we stab that into the medium and you can see I basically created a plug. So we push that out into the hole like so. That's how it's going to go into the holes that we drill into the logs. This is kind of an overview of how I do this with a whole group of people. Just today I'm kind of by myself. You can see how I could basically have 2 people drilling, as many as 4 people filling up the holes, and then finally the last station is we're going to seal the holes with cheese wax. And the cheese wax is just, in here in a little pot. I just bought a cheap, $20 hot plate. So we warm up that cheese wax and we use these little daubers, just these little teeny daubers, and you just dip it in the wax and then you paint over the holes that you drilled. Basically at that point you have a finished log. So that's a really brief overview of how we do that. So why don't we actually get a log in here, and I'll show you kind of some tips and tricks along the way and then some final tips at the end. All right, so we've got a log ready to go. Basically, I've cut this log about 2.5 feet in length, and then I've kind of pre-tagged it, and I'll show you what that tag's useful for toward the end. I'd say if you have about a 5 to 8 inch diameter log, that'd be about ideal. What you gotta remember is the larger the log is, the more time it takes for the mushroom to basically spread out and colonize the wood. And the longer that takes, the longer it takes to get fruit, which is our mushroom. So the drilling station is all about preparing the log to receive the inoculation. Basically, the process is drilling in a diamond pattern around the entire circumference of the log. So my preferred way to drill into the wood is using an angle grinder. Mainly because of the stance you can have, it's very easy to kind of push and hold this in place and accurately line up your holes. I've taken the actual grinder wheel off of here and adapted on this drill bit holder. All these things you can get online at that Field and Forest Products website. So I'd highly recommend, basically if you need something for this whole process, go on that website. Basically, this is designed to perfectly line up as far as the depth that we need to put into the log and the diameter of the hole for the plugs we're gonna push into the wood. You can certainly use a standard drill. You're gonna most likely need a corded drill. You're gonna burn through a ton of batteries. I've learned and failed in the past. I had a cordless drill. A cordless could work, but only if you're doing a smaller amount of logs. In the past, I've used really big wood bits with basically like a stopper, but I bought another drill bit that'll just fit perfectly right where I need it, and that's the same idea as the one on the angle grinder, but just put onto a normal drill. I've also made this spinning log mount. Basically it just sits on top of a wood surface and it's designed to roll around the log. If you don't have this nice little spinny device to get the job done, that's okay. You can just do it on a flat surface. That's the way I've always done it. I literally just built this the other week to see if I could, and it worked, so I'm happy with it. Another way to just kind of help yourself drill would be to just basically take a 2x4 on a table and use some wood clamps, and it can hold it down, and you can get the holes drilled like so. So that's a good overview of my drilling station, so why don't we get started? Let's drill some holes in this log. All right, it's gonna be a little loud. So that's it. That's just drilling the hole. It's really nice and quick. I probably should wear gloves from now on. That vibration really tends to bother my hands, kind of numbs them up a little bit. There's no particular scientific method that I'm using here. I'm just trying to get some holes drilled. As you can just see, I don't have it perfectly set up, but you can see how I've alternated the holes from each other. And that's allowing me to kind of have just, about 2 inches of space between each hole. I think that's about fine, 2 to 3 inches. Some of the things I avoided was, like this is kind of an open space, so I could probably just throw in one more there. Probably don't need to drill right on kind of a stub. And even that I probably wouldn't do. I might even wax coat that to keep the moisture from coming out of that spot. Drilling is a pretty messy process, so if you want to do it indoors, great. Just be ready to sweep up like I have to. What I'll probably end up doing is moving this station outside tomorrow. That's when I'm going to do my big batch of logs. That I think is just easier, so you'll have less cleanup. Just put a table in the yard and spread it out in the grass. Okay, so now we are on to the filling station. I like to kind of just open the bag up and work it through. Just basically making it from a block into just a bag of sawdust, essentially. You're not going to hurt the spawn. You can put a little pressure on it and move it around. You may only get so deep in the bag, so just kind of break it up into as smaller chunks as you can, and that's when these cups come into play. So I just basically grab a single cup and I fill it with the spawn. All right, so you can see we've got the holes ready to go. We've got our wonderful syringes. I just like to take the cup, push that in here, so it's got a nice solid base. Sometimes as you're working, it gets pretty clumped up in there, so you just kind of want to break it up a little bit by hand. So if it's just getting hard to push that syringe in there, that might be something you have to do. You can start wherever and just find a hole, get over it, and push right in. You can compress it if you want with your finger, but I think most of the time if you get the right amount in there, which is just basically a full syringe, you can push it in there, it's gonna stay in there. Obviously minimal handling because we need to seal this later. You know, start from one end to the other, work back and forward, whatever, and get this whole thing filled up with spawn. This step is really easy, and it's kind of nice when you have a big group of people, is usually the kind of the part of the project that takes a little finesse to get down at first, but then once you start filling a few logs, you got the pattern repeated over and over again and you're good to go. All right, so this baby has been completely filled. Probably good to just double check and see if you miss any holes. It's not a big deal if you did. As you wax it over at the next station, you'll see that there's a hole that's missing some spawn. Just send it back in the line and fill it up and then wax it and we're good to go. My method of choice with doing the waxing portion of this is using cheese wax. Cheese wax, when you buy it in bulk, comes in huge 18-inch by 12-inch slabs that obviously don't fit into a pot very well, so I have to cut them down to smaller sizes. This year I tried to use an old silky handsaw blade. Before you get all the way through, you might be able to bend and break it. It is wax after all. It is easy enough to bend it and break it once you have some grooves cut into it. There are different things like beeswaxes that are softer, and you can basically, get them out of a little container and put them right onto the log. The cheese wax you have to put into a pan, warm it up, and then apply it hot to the log, and it'll eventually dry. The waxing station is definitely the messiest portion of this project. When you dip the wax, it's pretty hot. You just let it soak up in the dauber, and it runs quite a bit. Whatever surface you have this wax on, it's going to be really difficult to get off. So again, I put down a tablecloth to protect the plastic table. So we got the wax dauber ready to go. It's saturated with the wax. Dab it on, dab it on, dab it on. And you don't need a ton of wax, unless the hole's kind of deeper. Sometimes I do. If you let the daubers get cold, they will wax up pretty good on you. You could probably try to warm it up again, but if they're slowing down the process, I just throw them away and grab a new one. You can order them by the hundreds, so it's not such a big deal. So we're basically done with the whole process, right? So I've double checked to make sure that I've waxed every hole. It's pretty easy to miss them, especially if you have wood with like thicker bark or like ridges in the bark, like oak. It may not be absolutely necessary, but what I like to do with some of like the side branches that I've cut off these logs is I like to wax those too, or anywhere where my chainsaw kind of nicked the bark. Even some of the bigger side branches, I think I'll wax that, but I do avoid waxing the ends. So the last thing that I like to do when I finish a log, I just take a short roofing nail and I put on these metallic, they're kind of like tinfoil tags. They allow you to write, just whatever on it that you want. What I tend to like to do is write down the wood species. I abbreviate it, so like M for mulberry, O for oak. And then I like to put the year, so just 22 for 2022. These logs do last for, maybe 3 years, maybe 4 if you push it. But you want to be careful, those logs deteriorate and you can actually get other fungus and other bacteria that build up on that wood, may contaminate logs. Plus a lot of the softwoods pretty much break down after the few years anyway. So there's really not much left for the mushroom to eat. So you can even use a pen, and right here the pen will fade, but the marks, the indents that you put into this tag will last. So I have M22, mulberry, 2022, and then I'm just going to put O or OY That just means oyster. M22OY, so I know it's a mulberry that I inoculated in 2022 with oyster mushrooms. Okay, well that's pretty much all there is to it. We've got the log completely drilled, filled, and waxed, and it's ready to be stored. So in the meantime, we're gonna basically set these aside outside. When you store them, just stack them in a pile. You can do like Lincoln log, cabin style, or typically what I've done in the past is lean them against a fence or a wall. Put them in shade. They don't need to be in deep dark shade or covered necessarily. If you got a spot on the north side of your house or your garage, or just somewhere where it's not getting direct hot afternoon sun, you can throw some landscape fabric over it, or even some like plastic over it if you want to help maintain some humidity. It does help to water them maybe, I don't know, I'd say once or twice a month when they're new logs, and as they start to get into that fruiting stage, it's going to be a few months, so probably 6 to 12 months before this log is fully colonized and ready to produce fruit. The oyster mushrooms will produce faster than shiitake mushrooms will. So you probably want to water them once or twice a week when you actually start to get some good mushrooms growing on them. They will have periods where they fruit heavily and then they go dormant again. There's a lot of good information online about how to optimize your mushroom harvest. Once I do start to harvest, I'll make a follow-up video on that. That'll be a while, but I hope to get a good amount of fresh mushrooms, but also to dehydrate some of these mushrooms and save them for the winter season. All right, well, thank you for watching this video. I appreciate everybody who subscribes, and I'll catch you on the next one. The wind is blowing a lot. So it's definitely not a different day.